Picture anyone you're talking to, whether it's one person or an audience of 100,000 people, they have two thought bubbles over their heads. WSIC, why should I care? And WIFM, what's in it for me? Everything you say needs to be framed from the lens of your audience, right? It's not about you. So when you're presenting, teaching, coaching, it's about the person on the other end. So you need to speak the language of your stakeholder if you want to connect with them.
Welcome to the Seismic Shift Podcast, where we explore the seismic shifts that are shaking up the way that you work and the way that you live. And thanks to Loyola University New Orleans for their generous sponsorship of this podcast. And now let me introduce you to Todd Cherches, who is not only my friend, let me tell you about his incredible credentials. I'm really looking forward to diving in on his book called Visual Leadership. And in addition to, he is an expert, a global expert when it comes to leadership and management. He's been identified as a global guru, Thinkers 50. He's a part of 100 Coaches. He gets Faculty Member of the Year teaching leadership at Columbia and NYU. And he's the CEO and founder of Big Blue Gumball, which is a leadership development company. So this dude has got it going on. Welcome, Todd Cherches.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. Great to be here with you. I always love your energy and enthusiasm. And I love your two books. So I look forward to, there's so many connections between your work and mine. I look forward to exploring.
Well, I am counting on you to make those connections because I have known about your work. We've known each other probably for coming up on 6 years now, working in 100 Coaches and groups together. And visual leadership, to me, in my humble opinion, has never been as important as it is right now. I think it is one of the true seismic shifts. So could you share with the audience why visual leadership is having its moment right now and why it's a big seismic shift?
Sure. I actually did a one-on-one interview with Marshall Goldsmith a couple of months ago, and that's one of the things he said to me. He said, you know what, I just thinking about it, no one's ever used that phrase in all my years of leadership coaching. No one's used that expression before. So in the visual thinking world, I'm known as the leadership guy, and in the leadership world, I'm known as the visual thinking guy. So it's kind of like this Venn diagram. And visual thinking is all about thinking in pictures as opposed to words and numbers. So that's at its most basic and simplest is what it's about. And you're all about, you know, helping people make connections. And what better way to connect than to see the same thing at the same time in the same way with people. So, and my catchphrase is, how do you get people to see what you're saying? And visual leadership helps people to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So I'm thinking that right now, visual leadership and visual thinking is having a moment because we tend to, as humans right now, prefer to see. We prefer to see the image. We want to hear the story and we want you to bring it to life. So when we're on social media, what gets our attention and what gets our dopamine hits, right, are the visuals. That's why we are all addicted to our phones. No one's talking on their phone, right? Mostly what we're doing is we're looking at these visuals that give us these dopamine hits, and now we're addicted. So tell us why you think right now visual leadership is kind of having its day.
Yeah, I mean, as humans, we are wired for visuals and we're wired for story. Right. So we're just drawn towards that. It helps us to connect ideas. It helps us to connect with other people. Going to a movie in a movie theater is a communal experience that's different from watching a movie on Netflix at home by yourself. Right. So we're looking for connection. There's the loneliness epidemic. There's COVID that, you know, isolated us for years. So there's this hunger. And I teach leadership at both NYU and Columbia. At NYU, I teach in a number of programs, but mainly human capital management. And we always talk about how do you put the humanity back into human resources, right? So just that phrase, human resources, is kind of dehumanizing in and of itself, whether you call it talent or people or whatever. People are looking for recognition. They're looking to connect with other people. So there's a real hunger for that.
You are absolutely right. And you're right. We are preaching to the choir and talking with each other. And our work is so aligned because I'm trying to figure out how do you connect in a disconnected world. So if we are spending most of our time on our phones because we're craving connection, and yet what's getting our attention are all these visuals, and they're making us think that we're connected. But all of the research and the science behind it is that it might be giving us these dopamine hits, which is causing this addiction, but it is not the same as human connection. So we're not getting that oxytocin. We're not getting the same things, which is why we're ending up disconnected, isolated, and lonely. As you said, Dr. Vivek Murthy has said we're in an epidemic. So what do we have to do differently? So if your expertise is in visual and you can understand why we're all addicted to this, mostly because of the stories that are being told visually. So that's what's getting our attention. And yet we're feeling disconnected from the human element. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, even that expression when you say to someone, I see you, right? It makes you feel valued. I always talk about 3 V's: visibility, voice, and value. Visibility is about, are you seen and how are you seen? Voice is about, are you heard and how are you heard? And value is about, you making a contribution and do you feel recognized for that contribution? That's what we all hunger for. We want to be seen. So I actually had to teach my NYU class on Zoom during the pandemic, and it was a very different experience than my previous 12 years of teaching in person. Students didn't have their cameras on. They didn't have their mics on. They didn't always put something in the chat box. And it's like, in terms of visibility, voice, and value, it's almost like you're invisible if you're not seen, heard, and given the chance to make a contribution and get recognized for that. So that's just in a microcosm, that's a great example of the difference between being in person and being online. So in a disconnected global world, how do we connect with people? How do we connect ideas? How do we make people feel heard and valued? This is a real life example. Last night was the first night of my new NYU class for this semester. And after the break, I said, let's make sure we all know each other. And I have 14 students. I went around the room and I called each person by name. They were blown away by that because one student said, I did a whole semester last year. My professor didn't know anyone's names. And this was session 1 of 14 weeks. And right after halftime, they said, how did you do that? What's your trick? And one, I go back to Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. One of his principles is to a person, their name is the sweetest and most important sound in any language. So when the student hears their professor call out their name from memory, how does that make them feel on day 1, right? Not even on day 1, like at midpoint. So right there, I have this connection with them that they feel like I matter, right? This teacher's going to care that I'm here every week. So when I hear other professors saying I can't get my students to show up for class, or whose fault is that? Is it your fault or is it their fault, right? So that's just one example of how by seeing them and making them feel seen, we have this bond and connection. And that's after week 1 of 14 on this leadership journey we're about to go on. I said, while we're going on this leadership journey together as a class, everyone in this room is going on their own personal leadership journey. And my job is to help you go in the right direction and to help you get there.
Oh gosh, I love that. Okay, you are such a cool New Yorker. You talk so fast. It cracks me up. And could you share the 3 V's again with the audience?
Sure. Visibility, voice, and value. So visibility is about being seen. Voice is about being heard. Value is about making a contribution. And it's as simple as that. We all want to feel that we've contributed and that we
want to be seen. We want to feel seen. We want to feel heard. And we want to know that what we're doing is making a valuable contribution. And so when I was writing this book with Marshall, The Seismic Shift in You, all about connection, I had to figure out what is the definition of connection. And that I didn't realize that you had the 3 V's because those are 3 of my 5 dimensions. I think that if you think about the last person who really made you feel connected, you probably felt seen, heard, valued, respected, and appreciated. So I came up with those 5 dimensions. And I think by just having a conversation and asking questions and saying, tell me your story, or how are you doing, really? Or even if you're already close with the person, you're working with a person on a team, by saying, thank you so much for the extra effort you put into that project last week. That's all you have to do to make someone feel seen, heard, valued, respected, and appreciated. So the 3 V's is a little bit easier. Well done. Thank
you. Well, I always say I started out as a 3 B's guy, a back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm all my years until I became, and I was someone who was always terrified of and terrible at public speaking. I never in a million years as an extreme introvert thought I'd be in front of people, let alone doing a TED Talk, teaching at 2 universities, and being a keynote speaker. So it's kind of, that's who I am today. I never could have envisioned even 20 years ago. So,
which is a perfect segue, because in all my work on connection, I have found that you really only can be great connecting with others if you've truly connected with yourself, which is owning your story, your strengths, your blind spots, your superpowers, and getting really comfortable in your own skin. And then you can connect with others. So please share with the listeners. Tell us your story. How did you go from introvert in the back of the room, bookworm as self-described, to where you are today?
Yeah, well, it's a long story, but the short version, I tell in my TED Talk, I open by saying, when I was a little kid in Queens, New York, growing up, people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say Superman. That was my dream, my aspiration. They said, well, if you can't be Superman, what's your backup plan? I'd said, Batman. So those are my two career aspirations. But what someone said as an executive coach, they said, even though you don't have X-ray vision like Superman, you do have visual thinking as your superpower. And with all the tools in your coaching toolkit, you do have like a Batman utility belt. So even though you're kind of a hybrid of both of those, but in a different way. So I eventually realized my 5-year-old childhood dream in what I do today. So, but the quick story is I majored in English literature, not business. So I majored in Shakespeare and poetry as an undergrad. I wanted to work in television, so I worked at Ogilvy and Mather Advertising in New York for a year. Hated it because it was a numbers job in media. I wanted to be an account exec or something creative. So I moved out to LA with no idea what I wanted to do, but I wanted to see the Hollywood sign every day. And I got a series of internships for Michael Nesmith of the Monkees, which baby boomers know. My students have no idea who he is. Then I worked for Aaron Spelling on Dynasty. I worked in comedy at Disney. And I worked in drama program development at CBS before I got out of television and got into the theme park business as a project manager. And all of those are visual mediums. Advertising, TV, and theme parks, they're all about media, entertainment, communication, connection, engagement. But the central focus is about storytelling. There's a lot of metaphor. So my background as an English major and the superhero thing was realized in terms of everything that I did. And then when I moved back to New York and I discovered management, leadership development, and executive coaching, I basically applied that creative background to the practice of coaching. And that's how visual leadership was born.
Oh, my goodness. So what prompted you to write? Because when did you publish Visual Leadership?
It was 2020. So it took me, so it's a little over 5 years right now. And it's being translated into Mandarin for release in China, hopefully by the end of this year. So that's kind of exciting.
Congratulations. So how did you launch a book into the world during the pandemic?
Yeah, well, when people say, how long did it take you? Abe Lincoln, when asked how long it took him to write the Gettysburg Address, said my entire life. So same thing with my book. How long did it take me? My entire life. So I had literally 2,000 pages of content, stories, models, metaphors accumulated for someday if I happen to write a book. But I had no idea how to write a book. So I met a guy named Rob Salafia who wrote the great book, Leading from Your Best Self. I met him at a leadership conference. I said, I know how to write a book. How do you get it out there into the world? He introduced me to his agent. We got a publisher and I got a book deal at Post Hill Press, Simon & Schuster. And my book was launched and it's been the foundation of my work ever since. So I basically put all of the content that I developed for my classes and my workshops into, not all of it. I probably had enough content for 5 more books, but for right now, the best of what I accumulated of those years of doing what I was doing ended up in visual leadership.
That's fantastic. So what prompted you at that point to write a book on visual leadership?
Well, people kept asking for it. People kept saying, can you send me this? I would teach something in a class or a workshop or tell a story. So I accumulated all this content and I figured a book would help to elevate me, and it did. It helped me to put my content out there into the world. And I always say with anything, it's always harder to decide what to leave out than what to put in. So a lot ended up on the cutting room floor. But basically my visual leadership approach breaks down to 4 categories: using visual imagery, using mental models and frameworks, metaphor and analogy, and storytelling and humor. Those are kind of like my 4 buckets. So my book is broken down into those categories. And when you use them in combination, it's even more powerful. So you can have a mental model and I can tell you a story about it. Or I could show you a visual image and say this is a metaphor for something else. So again, you could dice and slice or package them together. And one of the things I want to talk about in a second, your 7 shifts, seismic shifts, because the 3 that most resonated with me in my visual leadership approach, I love shift your perspective, because that's all about seeing. shift your conversations, because that's all about communication, and shift your language is about, that's where you get to incorporate your metaphors and your stories and everything. And so that triad of those three, really, I loved all of them, but those are the three that really jumped out at me with the most alignment with my visual leadership approach.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I love that. And so many people come to me, as I know they come to you, because we both teach leadership. We both do very similar things, right, in the world. And a lot of people come to me, particularly executives, like, okay, what's the secret sauce of being a really great presenter these days? Because a lot of the seismic shift in you, I'm advocating a real shift from talking at people and a shift more towards having a conversation, more towards informal discussions and conversations rather than talking at. So using your visual leadership concepts, how would you recommend to our listeners that you would deliver an outstanding presentation in this day and age?
Yeah, well, there's so many, but the one that came up as you were talking, picture anyone you're talking to, whether it's one person or an audience of 100,000 people, they have two thought bubbles over their heads. WSIC, why should I care? And WIFM, what's in it for me? Everything you say needs to be framed from the lens of your audience, right? It's not about you. So when you're presenting, teaching, coaching, it's about the person on the other end. So you need to speak the language of your stakeholder if you want to connect with them for two reasons. One, they will get you. And two, they're thinking you get me, because you're speaking my language. So if I love baseball, I'm a big Yankees fan. So if I'm talking to someone in New York, I might use baseball and the Yankees as an analogy. But if I'm talking to someone in Europe, I might use soccer, although I would call it football, not as opposed to American football. So even if you say the word football, if I say that to an American, they're thinking American football. Someone in Europe is thinking soccer, right? So even what is the picture that the other person is creating in their head? Because otherwise your metaphors can connect you as a short, because it's a shortcut, or they can disconnect you because it causes confusion and the other person, you're talking about two completely different things, right? So that, when you always talk about connection, it's like, how are you connecting with your listener? Are you connecting with your audience? Are you speaking the language? So I think that's a key way. So if you use imagery, if I say we need to plant the seed for an idea, see which ideas bear fruit, we need to go out on a limb, those are all tree-related metaphors. So we may be picturing different trees in our mind's eye, but we get each other. It doesn't matter which tree, right? So it's like, are you connecting with the person, or are you causing disconnection and confusion? So I think that's one of the biggest shifts we need to make, is the shift from me to the other person.
I love that. And so let's talk really specifics about presentation skills. I'm telling my students and my leaders that I coach these days, please don't do a PowerPoint data dump. No one wants to just have slide after slide after slide, just have a picture or word. So I want to hear, what are you advocating and what advice are you giving for great presentations? Yeah,
I say let your slide be your guide, right? That's what I say. So if you have an image up on your screen, maybe you have a word or two or three, but that's it. Do not, otherwise, some people call it a slideuments. If you're just putting up bullet points, I forget who came up with that. It might have been Nancy Duarte or Gar Reynolds or Susan Weinschenk, I think maybe said that. These are some of my colleagues who work in the visual thinking world. A lot of people use their slides as a crutch, and they'll say, well, bullet point number one, bullet point. You're boring people by bullet point number one before you even finish that sentence. If you put up an image on the screen, it could either be literal or metaphorical, but you should know what you want to say about that image. It's almost like if you're watching a TV newscast and you have the anchor, and in that corner above their head, you see that image, right? They don't put up all the words that they're speaking. That's on their teleprompter. So they're speaking to you conversationally about what's up there, and that image should support your message, not compete with it, and it shouldn't be a crutch. So I think that's one of the, among many, but that's one of the key things, is your images should support your work. Or if you could use props, it doesn't have to be an image. You could draw on a flip chart. There's all kinds of ways of incorporating visuals. And also, I just want to say, it's not just visual imagery as in pictures, it's also visual language. Because people have asked me, what if someone is blind or sight impaired? Does this not relate to them? And it does, because people, even if you're sight impaired, you could see something in your mind's eye, which is a term, because I was an English major, I know that came from Hamlet, from Shakespeare's Hamlet. To see something in your mind's eye is to picture it, but not with your physical eye, but in your brain, right? So as long as you could use storytelling, you could use metaphor, there's all kinds of ways of painting a picture. In fact, I was listening to your podcast interview with Marshall Goldsmith, and when you were talking about the origin of your book, you said to Marshall, Marshall, paint the picture of what happened in that conversation. So I'm very attuned to it, so I'm always picking visual language out of the air, but that's one real life example that you use to say, yeah, paint the picture of what this is going to look like, or paint the picture of what happened 2 years ago when we came up with this idea, when we had that conversation at Thinkers 50 in London. I could visualize it in my mind's eye almost as if I was there, and that's the magic of visual language.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Todd. I was in a master class this morning with Laura Gossner-Otting, and she does an incredible job as a keynote speaker and gets a lot of the biggest stages and charges some of the highest fees. And she was giving advice in this master class. And I noticed that her slides were absolutely gorgeous with vivid colors and only pictures.
Yeah.
And then so she would tell a story and have a picture. And then if she had a framework, then she would have one word,
Right.
the second word, and the third word. And I think that's what you're saying is if you want to give a framework and then tell a story or use a metaphor, paint the picture and have that picture behind you in vivid colors of just a picture. But the days of bullet points, are they behind us?
Unfortunately not, but they should be. One of my secondary roles at NYU is I do faculty observation, assessment, and coaching. So sometimes I'll sit in on other professors' classes, and I'll see they're still putting up black and white slides with bullet points and reading from them line by line. And, they don't. I actually have asked, would you have wanted to sit through the presentation you just gave? And they say probably not. And one of the things we always say is that PowerPoint was not invented to be a torture device. Right? it's supposed to be an aid in communication. So if it's competing with and not supporting your message, then you need to there's so many ways, and there's so many great books out there, like Nancy Duarte's book Slideology or Gara Reynolds' book Presentation Zen. So there's no excuse for not doing a better job at how we present. So I
think we probably teach in very similar styles, very experiential, engaged, exercises, role plays. And one of the things I held at the very end of my leadership class last semester, we sat in a circle to do our debrief. And I said, well, tell me. I said, I know I made you uncomfortable. Pretty much the entire Loyola baseball team was in my leadership class and 3 women. And they were graduating seniors. And I said, what did you think? I said, I know that had to have been challenging. Every time you came to class, I put you into connection circles, connection exercises. I asked you questions about your story, yourself. We went deep with listening and empathy. And they said, it was amazing. I actually, know my classmates, and none of the other classes do I know my classmates. B, I know you, the professor, and you know me. That doesn't happen at all. And so they felt a real camaraderie with each other. I'm struck by how academia has not adapted.
Yeah, it really has. Most people who teach, especially for adjuncts, I'm an adjunct associate professor at NYU, we're not taught to teach. We're hired to teach because we're subject matter experts. But teaching is not the same thing as doing. So there is a huge gap there. So sometimes I'm brought in to do faculty workshops to help train people in my visual leadership methodology. So for example, if I'm teaching a 4-box matrix model like my passion skill matrix, instead of just putting it all up there in one shot, I tell my students, leave your laptops at home, bring with you a drawing pad and colored pens and pencils. So I actually have them draw the matrix as I introduce it piece by piece. So it unfolds, we build it together. And then for the midterm, they have to reconstruct these things from memory and their retention. I always talk about attention, comprehension, and retention. Attention is getting people to focus. Comprehension is helping them to understand. Retention is getting them to remember. When you use visual imagery, language, or models, the attention goes up, comprehension goes up, and retention goes up. So it's, I've done like A/B testing. If you just throw it at them, they're going to just zone out, sit back, because it's a passive learning experience. If you have them build it with you, it's an interactive working experience. And there's this acronym VARK, visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic, which is about movement, feeling, and touch. If you incorporate all 4 of those elements into your teaching, you're going to hit the target. So some people say, oh, I'm more auditory or I'm more visual. It doesn't matter what you are. If you incorporate all 4 learning styles or modalities into your teaching, you're going to hit all your targets. And if you engage them in the learning, they're learning, right? And so what's the so what of that is when they're in a meeting at work And they have the confidence and the skills to get up at a whiteboard and recreate these tools and models in the moment in a meeting and blow people away. Like when I get emails from my students saying I grabbed the marker from my boss and sketched out one of the models I learned in our class, like that doesn't happen if you just spoon feed it to them. That only happens if they incorporate into who they are and what they do. So I love that. I love those.
Oh, that's fantastic. Tell us more. Can you walk us through the VARK model?
Sure. VARK is not mine. I don't want to take credit for it, but it's visual. So using visual tools, that's anything you take in through the eye. Auditory, what you take in through the ear. Reading and writing, which is basically text-based or numbers-based. And then kinesthetic, which is about movement, touch, or feeling. So one of the metaphors I use to explain it is if you were going to put together a piece of IKEA furniture using VARK, visual, you would look at the picture of what it's going to look like when it's put together, and then you lay out all the pieces on the floor as per the diagram they gave you. That's visual. Auditory is when you talk it through with someone else. You partner with someone else and they say, hey, which piece goes where, or what's your, so that's interactive, that's communication and connection. Reading and writing is when you read which size is it? You look at the sizes or the dimensions and you have to use words or numbers. And then kinesthetic is when you actually pick up the pieces and start assembling it together. So that's a great story, metaphor, analogy for how you can use putting together a piece of IKEA furniture to build a business model or use it in some other context. But
I love that. And let's use that model. One of the chapters I talk about is we've got to shift our meetings.
Exactly.
So I agree. We need to shift the classroom, the way that we teach, the way that we show up, the way we disseminate information. I absolutely believe there needs to be a seismic shift in academia. And so I'm glad that you and I are shaking it up. Now let's go into the workplace. How can leaders use these frameworks to run a better meeting? Because people say the meetings are a waste of time and it's their least favorite thing to do. And people are saying they're absolutely burned out because since the pandemic, now all we do are back-to-back Zoom meetings with no time in between, no bio breaks, no lunchtime. And by the end of the day, I really do believe that Zoom zombies are a real thing. Yeah. This is not good. So whether you're in person in meetings, although those are becoming more and more rare, or you're virtual, what as a leader using your framework, what can they do to promote more engagement during meetings?
Yeah, I mean, make it more of a conversation, dialogue, as opposed to a monologue, right? Because people, especially if people are online on Zoom or on Teams, or some companies are even using WebEx or Google Meet, people are multitasking. They're not focusing. They're checking their email. They're looking at other things. So again, attention, comprehension, retention. Attention, how are you going to get people to focus? If you use a visual, if you tell a story, if you make it about them, not about you. So there are all kinds of ways you want to engage people in the process. I used the quote last night in my class from Dale Carnegie. He said that people support a world they help create. If you get people involved in the creation of something, there's a sense of ownership, empowerment, and accountability. If you just say, this is what we're going to do, and this is what you're doing, Michelle, you're doing this, people are just checked out because they're having change thrust upon them as being an owner or a leader of the change. So that's the key thing. It's about engagement. It's about connection. It's about making people feel, it's again, that visibility, voice, and value. People want to be seen, heard, and contribute. So that's why I would say in meetings, give people a role. As a leader, you don't always have to run the meeting. What if for your staff meetings each week, a different person ran the meeting? You're developing their facilitation skills. You're giving them a sense of visibility, voice, and value. You're empowering them to take ownership and lead something. So there's all kinds of ways to do it, but those are just a few off the top of my head.
Oh, that's incredible. However you just described it made me think about in London, Marshall and I went back to launch our book just in November, Thinkers 50. And Amy Edmondson talked about, she was one of the top thinkers again. And her new research explores how leaders can create a shared journey, which is exactly what you were just talking about, is how do you say, okay, this is not just me giving you directives. It's not just me command and control talking at you, telling you what to do by when. It's saying we're going to do this together and it needs to be a shared journey. Here's where I want us to go, but let's create the plan, right? Let's create the map. Let's create the visual of how to get there. So I love that. I love the idea of shared ownership of meetings. Why not have a different person facilitate it, develops them. I also love what you said about why not, share this journey together. And it makes me think in leadership development, I know you do a lot with teams, coming up with what are the ground rules? What are the do's and don'ts? What are our shared beliefs? What's a contract kind of how we can interact together. And that's all about, one of my chapters is shifting your conversation, having a keystone conversation. How are we going to work together? How are you at your best, right? How are we going to navigate conflict when it happens? So I knew that we were really aligned, of course, but I didn't honestly realize how aligned were we. So now we've learned great tips from you, Todd. If you're a teacher in the classroom, great tips for presentations, how to make them more compelling, more visual. It's all about the audience, how to lead with visuals. And that means, making sure they feel seen and heard and they're making a difference and they know that they're valued. You gave us great tips for how to visually get everybody on board in a meeting. So could you give us top 3 tips to close out this incredible conversation with you? Top 3 tips of what humans, what leaders can do right now to make sure that we're connecting on a deeper level?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the first thing that came to mind, chapter 60, the final chapter of my book, Visual Leadership, talks about reflection, introspection, and connection. So reflection is about looking back, almost like looking through the rearview mirror to say, how did I get, like Marshall Goldsmith's, what got you here won't get you there. What got me here? Taking some time to pause and reflect on that. So that's reflection. Introspection is about looking inward at who you are and how you are as a leader. What do I need to change? What are some of my strengths I can leverage? And then connection, which is your centerpiece, is how do I connect the dots between my past, my present, and my future? How do I connect ideas? How do I connect with other people? So I think that's what I would sum it up with if you wanted 3 things: reflection, introspection, and connection. I talked to my class last night. One of my students says, how come everything is in groups of 3? And there's something magical about the rule of 3 when you have 3 things together. But also, I would also say use visual imagery, use metaphor, and use storytelling. So even your book title and your podcast, Seismic Shift. Seismic brings to mind shaking things up, and a shift is about movement from where you are to where you could be. And that's what I talk about when I talk about visual thinking and having a vision in your head. Like Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, which I just wrote about the other day. Vision is about painting a picture of a future state that's different from and better than the current reality, and realizing that we can't do it ourselves and we need to connect with other people and get them on board if we want to turn that vision into a reality. So I'll stop there.
Mic drop. That was fantastic, Todd. My goodness. Oh, if we could just have you come to Loyola and train all of our professors to really just understand that would be amazing, that we are in a seismic shift moment for sure. And if we want to attract and retain and keep our students satisfied as alums to where they want to give back so that the university can grow, and this is applicable to any university, not just Loyola, we've got to figure out how best to deliver content and education these days. And it is different than before. So thank you for being a role model for visual leadership. You gave our audience excellent tips. Thank you so much for tuning into the Seismic Shift in Leadership and giving your attention to the amazing Todd Cherches. And thank you again to Loyola for your generous support. Can't wait to see y'all next time. Bye. Thank you for joining us on the Seismic Shift. And before you go, can I ask one favor of you? Do you mind sharing today's episode with a leader you know? The power of this conversation is found in your using it and sharing it to create real connection in your life. Lastly, I'd like to thank Loyola University New Orleans for helping bring this content to life.